Yeah,
Crazy day?
yeah, of course.
Never ends.
Hi everyone. Sorry I joined late.
Hey, man. How are you?
All good. Hi Tim. Hi Jeremy.
Well,
Hi, Imran.
Okay, great. So we have Tim, Jeremy, Tariq here. Are we waiting for somebody? No, I think we can start because I think Abdul said he may not be able to join today, but that's okay. We can still continue.
Me.
So,
Yes,
yeah.
Imran, you can start.
Okay, perfect. So Tim and Jeremy, thanks for thank you for sending some further information out to us about Gen 1. We've had some preliminary discussion between us. We are still trying to work out a bit more details before we share some details with you guys. But I guess today we'll stick with our agenda and we'll start getting some information from you about Gen 2. So yeah, very exciting. We are finally in the Azure world.
yeah,
Absolutely. Something slightly more modern, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
it's only one version up. Come on.
Yeah. All right. Well, that sounds good. So today and tomorrow, focus on Gen 2. Today, we're going to get through as many of the questions as we can. And then if tomorrow I need to bring in other resources, I will to address anything outstanding. Because for today, I didn't bring in the architect or the lead developer yet. So if we cover the questions, if we can't answer it, we'll certainly let you know, and we'll pull in the other resources as needed. Is that fair?
Yeah, that sounds fair. Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
So I guess we can start with so if you want to share the diagram, should we start looking at that from an overview first?
Sure.
Yeah. Hold on a second. It's the only thing I didn't pull up.
Funny how that one works, huh?
Yep.
Jeremy, do you have the The one level up from this?
The ARC one?
Yep.
Sure, I'm pretty sure I do.
So I think, yeah, this is the one you shared with us, Tim, this diagram.
Yeah, there's also one more that kind of just shows the tiers. It's a little bit different format. This is a good one, but there's also one other assembly. Yeah. So, obviously Gen 2, very, very different architecture than what the overall Gen 1 is. So in this example, this diagram is a little higher level, and I just usually like to point out a few things here. So obviously it's a much more proper driven application. It doesn't have middleware or anything like that. So on the front end, we have, obviously from a traffic management perspective, we do have a Azure Traffic Manager, but just at a high level. So we have a multi-instance client front-end application that was written in ASP Core. So, and it has today's, various standards, but it currently uses .NET, and we'll be upgrading to .NET 3.1. We might even go up to 4.7 or whatever. But that front-end app, that's Razor code, that's ASP Core 2, that's Angular JS, Bootstrap, HTML5 front-end. Now that the customer access the application. And underneath that, you'll notice we also have a customer management portal. That's not accessible by our customers, but that portal is what ContractLogix uses to spin up and create tenants, to suspend customer tenants, to enter in customer tenant info. And that is a Node in Angular 2 application that runs, and it's all 100% tied to our internal AD, so only ContractLogix can access that. Now those using TLS 1.2 or HTTPS, that obviously goes into our server applications and services. So we have, in German, we'll show you this in a moment, but architecturally speaking, Microsoft Key Vault. We do integrate with a number of SSO providers via SAML and via OpenID Connect. We have our web layers. We have, various static content layers that are more the templates for the ASP Core, the non-dynamic pages, if you will. We have a service layer. Obviously, most of that leverages a lot of Microsoft services, so might be Microsoft Azure, Cognitive Search, or OCR, things like that. We have business logic layers, data access layers, and obviously most of that's all within our app. And then we tie to, obviously our blob storage and our Azure database or SQL servers, if you will, databases. And those Azure databases are in, they're in Elastic pools. So we have that SQL. We do use Azure Blob, obviously search indexing files and logs. And then audit logging, we use App Insights and a couple of other details there. But, pretty high level, but gives you a sense, pretty different setup. Underneath the function, you'll notice we have things like the App Insights, auditing capability where we do interception-based auditing within this app from a services perspective, all done from our code. Full backup, data recovery, and redundancy. Now, with that said, we have multi-instance of the apps running, but we do geolocate to east and west. However, west is currently, my understanding, Jeremy, turned off.
Correct.
And so most of our redundancy has some fail points, but is U.S. East and centralized blob. The reality is, though, with that, we need to implement true redundancy. But that's sort of how our application structure is set up from just high level of what it entails from our Azure platform. Jeremy, if you go back to the tenant flow. Now, this area kind of shows you the high-level diagram, and we can kind of dig into it. But I just wanted to make sure you had a little bit of the flow for, high-level architecturally speaking. So, Jeremy,
Yeah,
I'll
that
let
was already.
you take this one. Jeremy, you can kind of walk through how this is set up from your perspective.
Okay, yeah, so, picking up where the other one left off, obviously, client browser goes in the traffic manager. Right now, west is turned off. It's still replicating from east to west, but it's on the traffic manager, west is turned off. We can get into details why later. Then from there, everything is pretty much broken down by resource groups within the system as well. So it goes into the web app, uses the web app services.
Jeremy, sorry to cut you there. So should we just look at from the top, then traffic manager into these web apps? So what's the, like we did for the other one, the authentication authorization flow for this app?
Yeah.
And the users, are they pure outside users, internal users?
They're all external users, and they authenticate when they get to the app servers.
And is that Azure AD authentication?
Nope, it's inside the app. It's all built in within the app.
Within the app. Okay. All right. Okay. So the username and password, is that again stored within your database, encrypted?
It's stored in. So the tenant data is stored in one database. The credentials is all stored in a common database for the tenants. So,
got it. And the user creation and stuff is within your support team. They set up all the users, or is it like self-serve, password reset kind of thing?
Yep, self-served, all within the app.
Okay.
Now that's one part of it. That's true for user creation. So in the application, we have application level username, password with password policy. And then we also have integration with single sign-on. So again, that's at an app level, but single sign-on lets you set up, integration with Azure AD, with ADFS, with Duo Access Gateway, with Okta, and then you theoretically can do other OpenID or SAML-based SSO providers. But the ones I just noted are the ones we support out of the box from an SSO integration standpoint.
And who chooses which method to go for? Is it the end customer?
Yes. Yeah, the customer chooses, and I can kind of show you that if you'd like.
Sure, please.
Let me see. So if I share, can you see my screen?
It's loading. Yeah.
All right. So this application quite a bit different than the other one. If I go to settings, so as an individual tenant, we call it a tenant owner. A tenant owner would be able to, or an administrator, be able to come into the app settings, and they can choose different options. So one of those options is auth settings. You want to use username and password. If you do want to use username and password, do you want to enable two-factor authentication or just username and password? And then there's policies, required digits, lowercase, uppercase, non-alphabet, minimum length, unique, lockout after so many attempts, duration, password reset emails, force update every so often. So you have different password policies that you can implement. Also, if you choose SSO, obviously the administrator can set up these identity providers. So, we just mentioned those. This all uses standard OpenID Connect or SAML. So they'll enter in their issuer, et cetera, et cetera. And once they do that, it'll actually authenticate against the user information, so email, things of that nature. So all of this can be configured depending on obviously the different providers, ADFS, if you have, local AD, etc. Now that's if it's presented as an IDP, of course. And then you can set out inactivity as kind of a separate setting of auth as well as part of the authentication to the application. At a user level, if I go to a user, you can identify their email or their username. Obviously, in the case of SSO, it'll use their email address, and you can even turn on and off two-factor if you want it to be individually assigned as well. So in the app, so you have that authentication piece, so you're making decisions as a tenant owner to configure this for how your internal organization is set up, from a user to a authentication source. Once you've done that and you've kind of selected that, so you have your users, like the original app we talked about, you have the ability to set up role-based security for the features in the app, for administration functions in the app. You have the ability to set up roles and permissions for every single object and, sub-object type, so you can choose all the different parameters that are...
Wow, that's pretty detailed, actually. So is this all custom built logic?
Yes,
okay,
100%
very interesting.
coded from the ground. Yep.
Okay, very interesting.
So this will allow you to set up permissions on record types, and it can get more granular than that. In this solution, if I was to go to a specific type, so we're on security right now. So you can, in security settings, also in some cases get down to field level, who can edit or change the specific field. You can get to, viewing rights or permissions, even down to the section level. So each section in a record, you can say, oh, marketing can view that, or maybe the director of marketing only can view that, things of that nature. Everything is designable, but again, it all starts with that permission side, and then the authentication via app settings, users, and org permissions. So that's from a password protection and a turning it into roles. Those are the kind of initial discussions. Any question around that?
No, I think it's pretty. Yeah, that's fine.
And regard to MFA,
Sure.
Imran, sorry, one question here. Regard to MFA, is your own application, is Google Authenticator, and what you are?
In this example, Google Authenticator, yes.
Okay.
And when you said
Yeah.
SSO, have you set up any ADFS based or as well?
Yes, ADFS is supported. ADFS is supported in our SSO side. So you can do Azure, Okta, ADFS, or Duo. But that's ADFS. Yeah, you can choose ADFS, and if the ADFS is presenting itself as the IDP, yes.
Okay. And you have that set up in your on-prem environment as well, is that for authentication to take place?
Well, we don't use that at Contract Logics. We use Azure AD, but if the client has ADFS, they would set it for ADFS. If the client uses Azure, they would choose Azure, so on. These are all client level.
I'm with you now. Okay, perfect. Okay, that's pretty good actually. It's pretty detailed here. So in terms of who manages this, is it your support team who obviously this will be on first time onboarding the customer and you set it up for them. That's all good. And then going forward, who adds
Jeremy,
the users?
Do you have access to the CMP?
Yep.
So I'll actually explain that. So everything, once you access the application in production, you should know ContractLogix by policy does not ever access a customer's tenant like this. The only way a ContractLogix employee, support or otherwise, is through the customer and typically a screen share because of the security protocols. We don't allow people to just access it randomly. So there's no access. But we spin up these tenants or create these tenants using a customer management portal that we wrote and developed, purpose-built for tenant creation and management. And Jeremy will show you that now. So Jeremy, if you want to share your screen and show that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it so it does the full screen.
Yeah, no worries. And so when we have a new customer, as an example, they sign an agreement, we, within a certain amount of time, set up their tenant. We require their tenant owner. So their tenant owner, only has so much time to accept and activate their application, their tenant. And that's all done through this CMP. And you should know that whenever a customer end user is set up, if that owner sets up a new user at their level, our system will email. It will not set a temporary password. It will require that user to authenticate, set up their username via an invitation that does timeout, and it will force them to follow their policy. So depending on what that is, Okta or Azure, or maybe even a username and password, they'll set their password at the day one. And if they have MFA on, of course, it'll require them to use the second factor. But all of that is done from a tenant's perspective, not ContractLogix. We only use this application to create the tenant and to suspend a tenant, maybe in the event they cancel or they decide not to pay, and to define the tenant owner. So here's a staging environment. So you can see when we set up a new client, we would give all the information, the account ID, the admin info, which is like the tenant owner, enabling the APIs or two-factor, and then it'll give some basic stats of what the license usage are in the app. And then up top, if you go to users, this tells us who has or hasn't been added as users in that environment, so we can monitor it. We don't, obviously, we only have the info to centralize it and make sure if they ever need support. Contacts can range, this is a staging tenant, but this might be the billing contact versus the technical contact as an example. And then we do track usage. So this application is authenticated using Azure AD, and you have to be a ContractLogix employee. And actually, it's further segmented. Only certain ContractLogix employees have access to the CMP. It's actually very, very minimal because we do use least privilege. So that's just a high level.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty good. Sorry, Jeremy, do you want to?
No, that's all right. So, obviously after it goes to the traffic manager, it hits the app service that's running for that environment.
Now, one note.
Yeah.
Jeremy, you already mentioned West is off.
Correct.
But we are going to need to have active or redundancy for failover reasons. Earlier, when we talked about Gen 1, the secondary DNS, that's critical. That's a problem. We only have our primary name servers, NS1, NS2 set up. We need to make that redundant. And we have East replicating the West, but it's not active-active. That'll need to be resolved, obviously appropriately. So right now, everything flows through East. They authenticate to the sources that we just talked about with the username, the SSO, etc. And Jeremy, I'll let you take it from here. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's where it hits the application, which is has disaster recovery through the standard Azure Recovery Key Vault and DR sites. The app service itself is not replicated; it's just deployed it in East and West.
Okay.
Then that links to the Azure database, obviously through Azure Key Vault. For the security, for the security tokens, for the decryption, and the SQL server itself is actively being replicated to West in real time.
Okay.
At this current time, then that obviously that app service has ties to go into the DocuSign API integration. Same thing with automated alert. Which is a custom app that we built, and also the Only Office server, which is a VM, which supports our ability to modify documents on the fly. And obviously, as we talked about before, it connects to Azure Search, OCR, blob storage, and logs as well as part of the blob storage.
Okay. And can I just check a couple of things? So the app itself is, you mentioned in the other diagram, the layers, right? There was a business logic layer, and is that all those layers are kind of separated in code, but they're deployed within the same app service?
Well, not always. So all the service layers have individual web services all combined. So they are deployed as part of the same code set. In code, though, they are segmented from each other. And that's pretty much the mode of operation that we use for each tier here. So all deployed as part of the, standard code set. We don't commingle web services as part of that. And then the issue there, though, is that we generally scale up, not horizontally well. And so, obviously that side of it has some limitation, but we haven't run into any of those limitations as of yet. So when you look at that service layer as an example, that's where most of the services will reside, but they are segmented. There are a couple of minor differences. So when you look here at the DocuSign, we support DocuSign and Certify e-signature. Those are wholly separate web services. They're stateless, REST APIs, whatever. And obviously they connect to our app, but they're actual separate services and microservices for DocuSign and Certify. Automated alerts, that is a separate service, including separate storage of those services. And that's essentially the tenants push out to a master alert service that, coordinates all of the messaging that needs to be emailed or created. And then Only Office is literally a separate VM that our application calls like a service to actually edit, redline, and work on all the documents within our application. So that middle, segment there, those are all separated services. All the other ones are separate from a code perspective, but they're not separated from an application perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm with you. So can I just to understand again the segregation between the application, if you can just walk me through one scenario where there is a write scenario. So when I say write scenario, where a customer is initiating a request, let's say for a workflow to move to a next stage in the contract lifecycle, or it's like a write request where something needs to be written back into the database. And can you walk me through one read request where some customer is simply checking a status of something? So is that both goes? Is the read and write? So what I'm trying to get to is to understand your how you design your writes and how you design your reads in terms of two things. One is the asynchronous aspect of that call, and second is the reliability of the call. So in case of a write, if there is a network issue or something issue, does the customer lose that request? Does he get an error? So how does the write work end to end, and how does the read work? If you can, if you don't mind, just walking us through that.
Sure. So generally speaking, we separate everything. We do Angular routing and calls. So it'll do an asynchronous call, and that can happen at different timings within the application. Sometimes it'll, be basically a call and response with the page loading and opening and completing. Sometimes it'll be truly asynchronous where the page is updating fairly automatic. In any of those events, they're all web service API calls, all internal of the app. So we have applications that you'll call an endpoint from our app. So our app is about 160 APIs, endpoints, if you will. So the front end will call the back end. The back end will execute. Most of the data layers, most of the anything like that is actually performed on the server side, and then we present using the front end. We try not to do any of that, besides read. We try not to do anything from the front end directly. That includes validation. That includes the permissions of that. There are some minor instances, and we can get into those with the actual architect and developer tomorrow, specifically as well. So we can kind of talk through the logic of that. But, that's kind of what it is at a high level. And when you talk in terms of error messages, so when we're working on the systems, if you were to make a call and let's say for some reason the DB wasn't working, first of all, our application would likely provide you a maintenance or a similar message based on the right response code. Secondly, we definitely log everything in Apps Insights. And lastly, the end user would actually get an error message, typically by our application. We don't represent any technical notices where possible. So generally, our application will receive the response, or it might not receive a response if obviously something's down, and we will present the error to the client. The only time that generally isn't true is if the application itself is down, and then obviously it may do a standard browser type of error control.
Okay, and in terms of like moving, for example, workflow one stage to the other, that doesn't go through any reliable. The request doesn't go through any queue as such, right? Or it's a live request.
Yeah, we have a queue for workflow as an example, but we don't have queues for every single item in the system. So the one thing that I didn't notice on here, Jeremy, was the whole import services, mainly because it's in the master application. So when we talk in terms of this diagram, when you look at DocuSign and Certify eSign, when you look at alerts and you look at Only Office, all of those go through a reliable queue in service because they're wholly separate of the master app. And they're actually designed to, actually with logic and a bunch of validation and checks, including units and et cetera, to validate that everything's running properly and handle logging and everything it's supposed to. Jeremy, if you go back to the other diagram, when you talk in terms of these services layer, though, anything that sits in our web app, so import, workflow, reporting, those are not wholly separated into queues yet because the application is it handles a lot of that in real time. There is one exception, is we do have a service that, for workflow as an example, workflows can be continuous, they can be fully automated, meaning the web service is actively in a state validating triggers, conditions, and rules, which may be data related, user related, who knows? It's a number of configurable options there. The issue, though, is it'll run through the master list of flows in an order like a queue, but it is not a full queue where it's, sending a call and response for each workflow and receiving success codes, etc. And that is a limitation of the current constraint. What we'd like to do, we envision completely separating out the workflow layer into a true queue-based system, similar to our alerts, where it'll maintain all of that almost as a separate service and microservice or application, and it doesn't impact the master app. And the same thing applies for reporting, and the same applies for importing. Those areas, because they're not truly on a queue-based processing system, what happens is, like Jeremy might run into this, if you pass 10,000 documents at once to our system, depending on the size, it could time out. And we have, obviously checks in place for that service to log that. But, and if you repass the files to it, it'll continue like it's supposed to. But a better way would be to queue it and run logs and indexes against each, successful completion or otherwise. So it's kind of a mixed bag when you look at the web services from that perspective. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So this diagram represents just one environment. We have several environments, all broken down in resource groups. Well, as much as I possibly can. I just want to show you them real quick because I think it's important here. Kind of show you the overlap. So is that the new one? Yes, that's the new one. So these here, you can see I got my resource groups that I'm using. This is what we call our branch, our pipeline, basically. The service plan is being used for that particular area, the web service that's being used, and obviously what our URL prefix is. And that's our complete of a prefix, and it's kind of a quick description. So we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 active resource groups for the application right now.
That's for prod, right?
That's
sort of.
Sort of, yeah. Prod has a different resource group. It's kind of mixed with what they call the Gemini resource group. That's in the process of being moved into these resource groups, but it's just time constraints. It hasn't gotten there yet.
So we can get into that part of it. What was the green section up above?
That was the old way. This is what it used to be. So this is how it used to be when I first got involved, and I kind of morphed it in this. That way I can when I do disaster recovery, I can shut off a whole resource group to say, hey, that's no longer available, and make sure it fails over to the next resource group.
And in this matrix, the slot prefix, and then the deployment slot. So when you go to a URL, it might be my-qa.contractlogics.com or mypm.contractlogics or my feedback demo, so on and so on. All of our customers just go to my.contractlogics.
Correct.
And that's, what that looks like. So just as a high level, but this is good. And then we'll get into this more when we talk about CI/CD and we get into development and some of the continuous type of details that we deploy. Jeremy, does this have? So the other thing you should know is we have separate so we have the dev environments with dev, QA, PM. We also have multi-slot for when we are developing the next version of code or hot fixes and things of that nature as well. We'll get into that a little bit later when we get into that side of it, but development side.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So what about your dev environment? Is that one of these resource groups or is it like separate?
Next. Yeah, the next dash is the dev environment. The one with the red X's was supposed to be be part of our future, which is down here. Let's go down the path. A new branch that we'll be developing later down the road.
Okay. And do you do any performance testing or any like that? Where do you do that in case you need to do it?
No, we really don't. I don't do performance testing. The only thing I deal with is the penetration test and stuff like that, which we the intermediate spot from moving from development validation for regression testing and customer feedback.
Got it. And this is what your test team uses. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
internal testing.
It's multi kind of pronged. So any next hyphen. So when you look at the next, that means we have URLs next dev, next QA, next PM, feedback, etc.
Plus each developer has their own as well, which doesn't represent here.
So that's totally segmented from the prod environments. There is a next QA environment that during our agile and our SSDLC processes, they are required between construction and transition phases to actually QA and test the app. Developers also do Micro Focus 4 to 5 vulnerability scanning in real time as part of their development during that QA. And we also do code reviews during that same kind of time frame. That actually happens in next QA, in next PM environments. My QA in my PM means we're going from transition SSDLC step in the process to production, and that is where we do my QA is for regression testing and migration, not migration of like a customer from a different platform, but migration like of the database tables, where we're running migrations as part of development to add fields or tables or columns, all that sort of fun stuff. That all happens in the regression side of my QA and my PM. So totally separated from the dev environment to truly have regression testing. In a unit, from a code analysis perspective, unit testing, when we do that, is standard. It'll apply to all environments when that runs. So little different insight there, but
correct.
Okay, that's useful. Thanks.
Yep. And this ProdSec one is as closest to production as possible. It's usually like just a day behind production. That's where we do our demos. Our customers have sandboxes. Our stage and error we use to stage customers that are getting ready for production, and we have our trials. And that's completely on its own service. This is segregated from production as well. It's just production. East and West are in their own buckets, but they're completely segregated for geolocation, obviously.
Got it.
And I can, when we're talking about, the settings, to go against, like the logs and stuff, this is where we have the application settings that we set in the app services. This is what the back end settings should be per slot. It tells me if it's a front end or a back end service. And here's our key vault keys that have to be put into production, non-production. Our elastic pool mapping per, my dot. These are all the ones we were just talking about, my dev, my feedback, and so forth. So this tells me what elastic pool they're using. Here's our log token that they're supposed to be using when we set them up. Same thing with OCR, how it talks to the OCR engines, the search in, and to the blob storage devices. So we kind of track all that in case one of the services go down. I have a record of it so I can reproduce it at any point in time. But this kind of gives you an idea, all the app settings kind of, these will kind of give you an idea for each service that we have their own settings and what services they're actually using.
Okay. And the deployment then uses these values from here, or are these configured in the like Azure DevOps kind of thing? I think we can probably look into that when we do the...
Yeah, these are actually configured in the app services themselves.
Okay. Okay, I'm with you. Okay.
Yep.
And do you use like an environment variable there for the app service to know which environment it's in at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
And that's what we call the slot. That's what it's kind of using.
Got it. Okay, perfect.
Then I'll actually go into the app service itself. So this is the prod secondary one where we have, so the main one we don't really use on the app service. We use the deployment slots. And it has those trial, demo, staging, sandbox. So those are the ones where we're just talking about, and each one of them has their own configuration and their own domain, cert, and but they all point to the same database elastic pool. That's kind of the commonality. Each one of these service plans, the way I kind of configured it, each one of them, each data plan itself points to its own database elastic pool.
Got it. And this is a normal app services. This is not app service environment, right?
Correct.
Okay. And how do you control? Because you mentioned there's a VM and there's other services. Do you control? Do you use so if you go to like network in the settings here in the app service, if you just type network here, do you use access restrictions to limit what can reach out to this app, or
Currently
is it
not.
open to?
No, it's all open because every time I try to do it, something breaks, and I just haven't gotten. And it's one of the things I've been struggling with, trying to figure out how to get it to work correctly, to allow people from the public come in to access the app, and the app still run correctly from somebody's browser.
Because like in normal in some of the designs, you have traffic manager in the top, which is perfect, but then there's a layer in the middle which is app gateway, which kind of provides that WAF kind of a functionality in the middle, which then you can say here that allow traffic only from the gateway.
Yeah, so I do that with the virtual machines. They got the virtual machine, so this is in the app services. I'll just go to the virtual machine itself. Actually, I'll just go right into the app resource group for prod. East prod. So these are all the services that we're using in prod. You'll see I have this only office in here. I have the only office stack IP. There's a virtual network in here as well. I have the gateway in here as well somewhere. I think this is it here. The network security group. I'm using the security groups. Sorry.
Okay, so you're using the NSG, but that's okay. That's for like a traffic between the VNet and subnet, so I control through that. So, I mean, generally, do you have like a WAF firewall layer at all in front of your apps at the moment? Or
Correct.
is there something you have something?
No, I don't really have anything.
Okay. Because in your Gen 1, you had like a firewalls, right?
Correct. Yeah.
In the front of your web apps, and I think you may need something similar here on Azure as well.
Correct, and that's where I started doing it with the VMs. Like I ran into my biggest things when I started restricting the key vaults. I didn't have an issue with. I was able to restrict those by IP. The SQL servers, same thing. I didn't have an issue. But when I started doing the blob storage, it stopped everybody from logging in. I couldn't figure out how to do it without opening it up to the public to allow people to log in. And the same thing with the app services.
Got it. So blob storage, people need to come into blobs directly to like pull files or read files, or what do they do directly with blob storage?
Yeah, that's beyond me. With the architect would have to answer that one. I don't know why. I think it's just doing a test when it logs in to see if it's connected. But obviously, if I restrict it, it fails out because it's coming from a browser and not from the service itself.
Yeah, but to be clear, no human needs to, like our application is supposed to talk to it, not people.
Correct.
Yeah. So I think maybe the locking down is something we need to look at, in terms of who can reach out. This is the problem. This is a very typical problem with these PaaS services, is that by default, they're open to the world, and you really have to kind of try and lock them down to who can talk to them. Okay.
Yep, and that's been one of my struggle points, is trying to resolve a lot of that.
Okay.
It's the same thing like why I don't want to, with the SQL servers, I'm doing it using the firewall SQL server. I'd rather use the gateway and use a VPN for everybody to log into versus logging directly into the SQL server. Like
yeah. Okay. That's okay. And, and between the PaaS services, like you had, sorry, if you want to go back to that diagram, I just want to ask just a couple of questions around this.
Sure.
Around how traffic flows through.
Did I? Oh, I don't know where it went. There it is.
That's fine. So, when the app talks to this VM, the OnlyOffice document server.
Yep.
So the app talking to this VM, how is that communication taking place? Is that again via public IP of this VM, or is it internal?
Correct.
It's using.
It's a public IP from the VM.
From the VM, okay.
Yep.
I think that this is again, like stuff like this VM could be locked down to only allow traffic from this app unless other things need to talk to it. But it seems like only the apps need to talk to this VM inbound.
Correct. And the only exception to that is like I'll whitelist like a corporate office. That way, if I have to test it, to ping it to make sure it's active, I'll do that. But that's just a small exception.
Okay. And then again, similarly, the DocuSign service is that like is service from DocuSign? I believe is it
Correct.
Do you deploy it within your, or is it they're hosted or you're hosting it?
No. So that's 100% DocuSign hosted. We use their REST API.
Got it.
To just talk and integrate between the two. So we'll generally do gets, puts, posts, patch, between the two, and call their services. And the same applies to Certify. Although Certify, when we did the integration, did not use RESTful. That is something that we'll be tackling in Q4. So they just have web services, and they have good security protocols, but we prefer to go REST, and so that'll happen over the next two or so months. So wherever that you were in the diagram, it says DocuSign. That theoretically is DocuSign and Certify.
Yeah, it's e-signature services. The One thing I just noticed, Tim, I never put on here was SunGrid.
Yeah, and we also use, so there's basically for all the alerting where the automated alerts are kind of multi-purpose. So automated alerts create email integration to using SendGrid, and then again we just use the SendGrid API, and then they also use an API that our system has to create in-system notifications. So when you're navigating our application, an end user might get an alert right in our UI. So that automated alerts does email integration through SendGrid API and also our API for in-system.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I think these third-party services which you need to call out to, I think that's fine. Yeah, so again the outbound should be, that's okay.
Yeah.
So in terms of the SQL then, and then who can reach out into your SQL database? How is that logged?
It's all by firewall right now.
By firewall.
Yep.
So how you allowed only the apps to talk to SQL, or is it allowed by?
So I'll just show you the settings real quick. It'll be easier. I'll just go right to the servers. No, SQL servers. Wish this had put in alphabetical order. So I'll just go to the prod one. Firewall. So we're going to restrict it down to these IP addresses, and we just allow Azure services to automatically connect. So the app servers can automatically connect because it's within Azure.
Okay. I mean, this is fine, but this again opens your SQL to all the Azure services, and not only your web app, but other web apps as well.
Yeah. So
you may want to consider where only your particular web app can talk to your SQL and nothing else can. So that's also part of the same thing, I think, which we can look at. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that would be great because that's where, like I said, that's where I've been struggling to get that locked down correctly. So.
Sure. I think that's fine. Okay. I think this is okay. Sorry, you were then showing the web apps. So in terms of the scale, you mentioned it's app service plan and it's not app service environment. So do you use single instance in these server, or what's the size of this app service plan?
Okay, so they kind of vary. So I'll go with like the continuous pipeline first. It's just using P13, so it only has like 4 slots. It's kind of middle of the road. Then prod is using a much higher one. Gemini Spy, I think it is. It's using an S3, which more powerful. So, and I got one other one. Next is using a different one because it has 20 slots available in it. So. Yeah, and this one's using an S2. So.
And are these all single instance, or are they like if you go on the scale up, or do you use multiple instances or single instance with auto scale? Do you use any auto scaling anywhere, or?
No, we don't use auto scale, and I think we started testing that in the next pipeline.
So scale out. If you click on scale out, one down from here, yeah. I think you're probably on a default single instance. Yeah, one
Correct.
instance.
We're doing a single instance here, but in production, we're doing multiples.
5.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, prod we use 5 instances of the app, and it actually can scale and use auto heal and all that sort of fun stuff.
It's auto scale outs or it's just for
Yes, if you scroll down, and so instance limits is 3 to 5.
Correct.
And this will auto scale based on, and we can ask this to the dev guys, but based on usage. So things like we had memory and, this one says scale out when CPU percentage is greater than 70. And obviously when it's less than 30, it'll automatically decrease. So the minimum number of instances in prod is 3. Generally, it'll scale up to 5, almost, instantaneously. And so we can build that out. But obviously, this is an area that this coupled with redundancy and obviously cost optimization and doing this stuff to standards would be obviously something we want to look at and resolve to ensure maximum availability and, no issues from an app perspective. This was off about 3 months ago, and then we went to multi-instance because as more and more tenants and clients on board to this product, obviously scaling up or scaling vertically versus horizontally became considerations. Generally, we think that a lot of the times the horizontal scale it can be a lot more cost effective in a lot of cases, but there's obviously in either methodology some drawbacks or considerations. So this is where we ended here, was 3 to 5 right now.
And that's good actually. And when you turn it on, you found that the application was okay with it. I guess you're using stateless requests, so no sticky sessions, and it worked nicely. Yeah, we didn't face any problems, any errors.
We ended up testing through it, and we changed very minimal code. But yes, it's been fine. But the whole catalyst was Microsoft ended up having in blob storage a memory error. And so our systems were, during deployment of new apps, they could time out for memory reasons. And that was resolved, and it's not a coding issue. It was a Microsoft issue. However, we are still in the process of monitoring all of that. But yeah, right now there's no issues with the multi-instance. Everything's been running great over the last couple of months. So, I think as a whole, it's been a good change.
Yeah, I think that's very, very positive because, again, a couple of applications we worked with, we turned on, scale out 1 to 2 instance, and the whole application falls apart. So we've seen that scenario.
Well, that's the thing is when you're looking at our Gen 1 app, that would apply because it does require sessions and all that sort of stuff. We do a lot of that, but we can terminate a session and actively sync them to a new server state or instance, and the system will heal itself. And, we actually base all of that. So the other reason why we did that, if you think about it, if a instance runs out of memory, we automatically move that user to the next instance. And if it does, we will auto kill the instance and restart the instance from an error control. And we use 502s, and we, do all the right error control and error handling based on that. Those instances, so we can auto heal and re-kill and start instances to ensure the health is always there.
That's very good. That's brilliant. Good.
Yep. Now, I would like to see a little bit more, obviously, granularity in the rules for it. And I'd like to understand cost optimization Because usually scale up with Azure isn't, like I said, always necessarily the best approach. Some additional segmentation of services coupled with, horizontally scaling, I think can make a big improvement in a lot of areas. There are some scale up tendencies as well, but I think a lot of the times we never really use all the instances to their full capacity, and therefore maybe the horizontally is a better approach. But anyways, we're certainly interested in understanding that from the best practices perspective, from you guys' perspective, and how that should, technically work if, you guys have experience in that area to help us continue to improve it.
Yeah,
Sure.
I know one of the things I noticed when testing the multiple instances, it might be possible that we can actually scale down the app service at some point if we're using the instances correctly. Because we at first we're in the habit of just scaling up versus out. So
Well, you hit a ceiling really quick when you scale up, and it just costs a lot of money, but it doesn't necessarily improve anything. So at any rate,
I think that's very valid. And if you look at the Microsoft SKUs, sometimes they don't make any sense when on scale up. So you'll have like 120 pound server per month, and then that jumps to straight away to whatever
we're
300 and straight to 500. There's nothing in the middle. And you say, look, I don't really want that much. You can't really ask for like 10% increase or 20% increase. You have to go straight 100% increase or 200% increase, and that's
correct.
cost wise. It's too much.
Yeah. So like the next level out, is almost $900 a month for the next level. I mean,
exactly. So that's what, like 400% increase straight away. So
Yeah.
that's a bit. Sorry.
well, there you go.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so just from some of the, so sorry, Jeremy, if you want to continue to show something, because I wanted to see about again, in our list. So we had Tim, things like naming conventions and subscription models. Do you want to talk about that now, or do you think you want to cover something else before we go into those things?
So when we talk about naming conventions, we're talking about just Jeremy's habits within Azure itself.
Yes, I would say yes. Exactly.
Yeah, we can talk about that now. I don't mind staying in order. Go through your agenda. We can always figure out the resource side and schedule time with people. It's fine. So no worries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can see. I brought this up because it handles most of my naming conventions. What I switched to before, it used to be just called CLX Gemini was everything. You got to kind of guess what you're kind of doing. So I started doing CLM for contract lifecycle management product in case we had multiple product lines coming down in the future. And obviously the environment, which the pipeline, which is prod, or then what location it was. So we got, this is just prod east and west. This is prod secondary, and we just have it in east. This is prod continuous server, the continuous pipeline. For the regression stuff, we talked of east, and we got next for the next pipeline and future for the future pipeline. And I kind of try to keep I was kind of doing that for all the services. The thing that kind of gets kind of blurry is when you get into blob storages, because you can't use dashes and stuff, so it started getting messy. But that's kind of the convention I kind of stuck with. I got them all here too. You can see they're kind of consistent with what they were and what they're, because these ones are deactivated now. So this is what they were and this is what they are now. So they kind of coincide with the pipelines that we kind of deploy in according to our SDLC.
Brilliant. So I think the move, obviously, I can see, from only Gemini to what you've done is brilliant. So you have the environment there, you have the region there. So I think this is great for, and like you said about various resources. I mean, ideally, and even if you look at how Microsoft Azure, you can reach out to every resource from the URL, right, from the top. So so it's all quite nicely arranged in that sense. So what you need is, like within Contract Logics, is your own naming conventions, like dictionary, and it should be whatever documented in Confluence or Wikipedia, whatever you use internally, and you can always take recommendation from. If you just search on Azure naming conventions, there is a document published by Microsoft on MSDN, which gives a kind of a base guidance of how you should name all your resources. So you can always, if you want to take some guidance on maybe a keyword name, or maybe one of a new, like a gateway or a VNet subnet name, and you think that you don't know how to construct it, then you can always take a reference from that guide which is there. So we used to do similar guides of our own and for customers, but then Microsoft kind of published one as a base, so that's really useful, and we kind of recommend that. But I think what you're using is good. It's very close to it anyway, so it's great. But I think internally within the company, for you and other people in the team, they all should refer to that guide, and they should, if anybody is spinning up a VM or a storage account, they should make sure that is followed, and you can enforce that. And this is the key thing, right? Because various teams, various departments, they tend to create stuff, on randomly. And I did a piece of work for a council, for a government council in UK, and it's a very small council, and there's a small team, and they had app services created in all the regions around the world. Whoever picked up East US, they created something in East US. Somebody created it in Europe. So it can get really messy very quickly with Azure. So having the policies in Azure and enforcing some of these things, so you can even enforce naming conventions now through policies. So if somebody's trying to, even if they try to create a VM not following the naming convention, that VM creation will fail. It will not let somebody create it because it's enforced through policy. Do you use any policies? Have you applied any policies yet?
I didn't realize I'm applying because we got stuff. Somebody's been creating stuff in Dev. In North Central. I think I did this ADFS server because we ran out of VM space in East. I think that was approved one, but there's some in here like Central US. We don't know why Central US was used on these.
Yeah, sometimes it's a bit funny with Microsoft that if you, for example, if you try to create, I think it's in certain resources like Service Bus, or you pick up which one was recently I was trying to create, it just selects US by default, regardless of where you are and where your resource groups is. Sometimes Microsoft selects a default region for you, and unless you change it, it's gonna just create it there.
Correct.
You can apply the policy at the region level.
You can, yes. So you can say nobody can create anything outside region X, and it will fail. Absolutely.
This is worth, without a doubt, looking into because of Granite and stuff.
Yes, exactly. That's where the Central, I think, is coming from. The Central, like our prod is running in East 2, but everything else, all the databases are running in East US because I haven't had time to move them over from East US 2 to East US to be consistent. So.
And you can, and Tim, you can even enforce things like sizes of resources, right? So again, just to give you an example, I have tons of interesting examples. So one of our colleagues in Microsoft, he was doing a machine learning experimentation. So he spinned up a huge Hadoop cluster, which he left running over the weekend. It was a long weekend, bank holiday. After 3 days, the bill was £8,000 for that server, right? Because there's nothing enforcing, nothing stopping the resource, but you can now through policy even limit the sizes. So what size of VM or app service plan you can go up to, especially for dev environments. You need to limit that a bit, what the developers can do, because you do need to give them a free hand. You do need to give them the ability to create stuff. They're experimenting. That's all good, but they need to stay in a certain limit, certain sizes, certain regions, all that sort of stuff.
Understood. And I think also, Jeremy, for clarity of redundancy and geo and all that sort of stuff, based on how we roll stuff out, I would say that's going to be critical to do that right as well.
Correct.
Because it'll be easier for you more than in the internal staff versus the dev side.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, yeah, very, very fair points. This is good stuff.
And similarly, the naming conventions. I think seeing things consistent, which I think you made a great effort here, Jeremy, to get stuff in a better shape. But yeah, for future as well, naming convention wise, also try and enforce that through policy. So we can guide you, again in the document how to do that, and then you can continue. Yeah.
Well, and also, I think in terms of Jeremy, it's all time, I know, but when we talk about consistency in making sure we have a plan to finish, let's get everything in U.S. East that's supposed to be in U.S. East or whatever, finalize all that, and then say, all right, we've got to create a fully redundant active or hot, environment in West. What does that look like? And why are we going to do it that way? And what if we want to broadly recreate the entire structure? That's the type of recommendations I think, Jeremy, you're going to need so that we can get some of that over the finish line, right?
That is correct. Yeah, because like I got the redundancy now from running from east to west on the database, but on the application, the database can, even if I turn on west now, somebody uses west, it's still accessing the east database. It doesn't automatically, hey, pay attention to the west database server. It automatically still keeps on looking at east because east is the primary. So I needed to know how to figure, get that type of redundancy working correctly within the app and within the infrastructure. And should it be in the same resource group, or should it be separate resource groups? That's the other thing.
Yeah, and just FYI, we can get to some of that with the redundancy and failover side, but that's important because you have that coupled with cost optimization, right? They're all kind of important factors. We need to complete this part of the project so that we know clearly, here's our production environment in East. It's all exactly correct, labeled, done. All the other resources that we don't need or whatever are turned off. And then we can, replicate and have a full active to West, and, the right replication, the right details behind that. Also, when in terms of, what am I thinking here? In terms of, utilizing Central for blob versus maybe locating that into the separate regions of choice based on where the user is accessing. Things like that I think become sort of critical for failover, but I also think for just natural, resource management, if you will. And then the only other thing to add, in your naming conventions, while they're descriptive for the naming, we also use tagging because, as you guys might imagine, the business front and finance needs to know cost of goods versus, resources that are not cost of goods. And so we sort of try to do that. And I don't know if this naming convention guide gets into that level of detail, but it's definitely got to be allocated correctly and proper. So Jeremy's using tagging. Does that guide get into that type of stuff too?
It does actually. I mean, you can even enforce your resources to have mandatory tags, and it would fail otherwise. So, because for billing, you don't want 80% of your resources correctly tagged, and then 20% of resources missing those tags. So you want it.
Yeah, I know, because right there, my pain right now is I actually go through all resources once a month to make sure they all have tags on it if somebody created something new or something like that.
Yes,
Now-
you need to use policies to just enforce all of that to make your life easier. Yeah.
And besides policies, can there be monitoring of new resources spun up where we receive a notice?
So basically, I mean, obviously, what the policy will do is it will not even let the resource fail, unless you put an exception there and say, okay, no, exceptionally, I want to allow something. So, for example, you can say we can allow exceptions to say, okay, I want to create something in a different region for whatever reason. Then you put in a reason in there. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if the policies are there and for tags. So sorry. So your question is, if it fails, you need to get an alert.
No. If
It's
we
missing.
allow something because they're doing it right, and I still want to receive an email of the resource spun up, can we do that?
So there is something we did for where in PowerShell there's a script which would traverse through all the resources, which I believe Jeremy said he's trying to do, and it kind of finds out things which don't have tags. Maybe that can generate out a report to say in your 120 whatever hundreds of resources X, Y, and Z don't have tags. That is something you can run in the background. Now, yeah, so I think that is something maybe that might be useful to you for your existing stuff that's already there.
Yeah, you probably could use something similar to say, hey, turn on an alert if it's a new one. It was created within the last hour or whatever.
Yeah, maybe we can put like a created date time to check the recent one. Yes.
So, Jeremy, what I'm thinking of there is the unknown, so that 30 days from now, you don't end up going, what the? Because, obviously, as you guys put earlier, if you think about it, development will spin up resources. We're in the current throes of developing AI and various deep learning, machine learning solutions within our architecture and auto extraction, et cetera. A lot of that leverages Microsoft Cognitive and variations, but the reality is we spin up resources as a dev group. The policies is good, but also just invoking a notice to Jeremy and myself and other team members that had happened is also beneficial because we like to do training, we have security training, we have a lot of things we do, and then also just to optimize our usage of Azure and the cost side and how we do all of that. It's important to know exactly what it is so that we don't have to fish, and I'd like to know sooner, not later, in most cases. So if we can use something like that to receive a notice, that would be great. Other than that, Jeremy, I'm basically relying on you.
Correct. Yeah, like if we can use the monitoring services that Azure already has, it'd be beneficial. But like I said, worst case scenario, we could kind of, like you said, do a shell script as well.
Yeah, I'll have a look if there's an easy way to configure a default alert for finding exceptions. But yeah, that's something we can have a quick look. Okay. So we talked about Azure. So we didn't really mention subscriptions and how are you managing your overall subscription and how are you distributing cost?
So we just have one subscription right now, and I kind of just break everything into resource groups. I have one or two resource groups where I use what I call the Corbett level. I mean, basically use them for, testing for, the G1 platform, or I'm actually using the Key Vault for the G1. So I got that more on a corporate level type thing, and eventually we'll have our corporate website running on there as well. But basically, I'm just breaking up by resource group where we have everything under one subscription right now.
Okay, so somebody pays the bill for the whole subscription, and you don't need any payment level segregations, I believe, within your dev test, different environments and all that.
Correct.
Okay.
But Imran, I think they must go with the dev and UAT environment. This will be reduce their costing as well.
Like you mean like a segregation at the subscription level, like dev subscription, prod subscription?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is, again, we'll share some of the subscription strategies with you in the document. Again,
Okay.
The most commonly used subscription strategies. There are a couple. And like Tarek is saying, there is an environment-based subscription segregation strategy. There is a department-based, but depending upon how many applications you have, or you will have more applications in the future or not. Again, we'll try and put those recommendations in, and then you need to, and then we can discuss with you and see which one actually applies to your needs.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so just going through the list, we talked about naming conventions. We've briefly talked about so Tariq, from the we have a section on network design and security here. I'll just ask a couple of things, and then Tariq, if you can ask certain questions from your end. So in terms of this application Gen 2, does it talk to anything on premise? What we looked at looks like it's a fully cloud only, right? Is there any express route or VPN or anything going on?
100% cloud.
Okay.
Are you guys using any VNet pairing, or how many VNet, by the way, you guys are using? And is there any side-by-side VPN or point-to-side VPN?
There's no site-to-site VPNs right now. I'd like to get to that point for security reasons, but I do have a couple of VNets set up for the VMs for the G1 testing that I've done in the past.
Okay. Is there any segregation like your internet-facing applications and your backend applications?
No, it's all done through the app services, so we don't use any VPNs at all or VNets.
Okay. So I think it's just pretty much straightforward networking. There's no kind of DMZ and these type of concept is deployed.
Correct.
Yeah, but I think when this is the as-is model, right? I think but when you do apply lockdown and where things like VM with the Office app VM is on public IP. I think when you do lockdown things, then you will need some sort of like a jump box and maybe a point-to-site VPN, to get into things, to manage those things, because at the moment obviously they are available through public IP and you can manage them, but in the recommended lockdown scenarios, we may need to look a bit more around how the network is currently set up there.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, and we had the elements of. So I'm just going to quickly ask a few more, and then we will then continue in our next session, given the time. So data-wise. Data at rest and data in transit. I think transit-wise, HTTPS, you mentioned TLS, right? And the at rest, are you doing the same thing as Gen 1? Everything is encrypted at storage?
Yeah, it's being encrypted at storage with just the standard Azure using Elastic pools, the standard settings on the SQL servers. I'll just go to them. Real quick.
Is it disk or is it actually SQL? I think it's disk, I thought.
Yeah. I got transparent encryption turned on, but we're not using it 100% right now. But I'm using the standard disk when I set up the SQL server. I can't remember where the setting is. It asked me if I wanted to encrypt it or not, and I say yes. Let's use the standard Azure encryption with Key Vault.
In managed instance, you don't have the disk. It's on the backend. It's from the shared model.
Correct. It's on the shared
model. On the VM level, you can go for the disk encryptions if you go to the VMs.
Correct. Yeah, I haven't. I've done that on the VMs. The only Office Broad would be the best one. So does it look like it's the encryption.
Can you click on any disk and open the properties on the disk and like only Office Broad OS disk or whatever? and go to encryption. No, I don't think so. You guys deployed the encryption.
Okay, so that's one thing we'd have to look at and figure out how to get done then.
Okay.
Jeremy, go to the other disk.
What's that?
Can you go to the other disk?
It's the other disk.
Go back there, yeah. What's the top one? Yeah.
That's the OS.
Oh, yeah. Okay, my bad. Yeah. I was just wondering. That's fine. And that's for that, but we don't do anything. That's just a
Yeah.
if you go to can we do this at a SQL level?
Well, it's all shared pool. So,
Yeah, gotcha.
so everything in the Elastic pool is encrypted at rest, as far as that I've read and been told. I don't know how you can tell.
How would you check that? Imran, Mohammed?
On SQL level, you guys can only deploy on the transport level. It's not on the data level because the data is not under our control. It's under control of Microsoft.
I mean, I have what I've looked at is like Cosmos DB. Microsoft has recently introduced like bring your own keys, so you can encrypt at storage with your own keys. I need to check with Elastic Pool with SQL whether that is a available feature or not. I don't know whether Tariq they've done your own keys here.
I have done with the premium and standard and premium. We don't have it. It's with the Microsoft, but we can deploy on the transport level.
Okay.
Okay.
So that'll be part of your recommendations though, correct?
Yeah, so we'll look at the Elastic Pool encryption at rest. I'll take a note of that
Yeah,
element, and then obviously the VMs as well.
correct. Okay. Now, when in terms of blob storage, what does that look like from a standards perspective? Are those encrypted?
Yes, these storage are also require the encryption if you can. There's encryption. Yeah, little bit up. Up. One step. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, in
There.
Microsoft in this case.
You can manage it.
So you can do your own keys and have it linked with the key vault. Again, it depends. It's about your policy whether you want to manage your own keys. So a lot of customers do one production key vault, which is their main key vault, with very tight access to it, and then that key vault has your own keys, which you then encrypt all your storage with. And if you do that, then even Microsoft can't decrypt even if they wanted to. Normally they don't. Even with this option, they don't. But they can. In whatever situation, but if you do your own keys, then they can't. Yeah.
But in this example, so all of our blob storage is encrypted today using Microsoft managed keys.
That's true.
And then Jeremy, and then obviously in transport. And so when we talk in terms of the only Office server, that's not actually, what that does is strictly opens up the blob document within our application. And that's a very temporary thing, but we encrypt the in transit based on our app, and we encrypt the blob. So from a risk perspective, in terms of we open the doc though by using that VM to obviously, do the document editing and all that sort of stuff. But that server itself does not need to be technically encrypted because it's just basically a middle app that we're calling to present the application in our product. So real quick, an example of that, and I bring this up because it's also about a question, but if I go back to my app and I go to a Word doc, that Word doc opens up in this editor. And we chose only Office because they allow us to, we can have frameless design. And Microsoft, doesn't allow us to, we have to use their frame, if you will. And so when you're doing all the editing and the collab and all that sort of stuff for redlining, that was the big issue there with Microsoft. But this is what that VM is for only Office. So just FYI, just a little context around that. So I'm not sure that needs to be, but it's obviously we want to employ the best practices and make sure that everything is secure and there's no holes or risk where possible. So anyways.
Correct. Especially I need to make sure I know should be doing it. If I need to be doing it when I move G1 to Azure, I need to make sure I can set those VMs up correctly to make sure they are at rest correctly and not just going by what the defaults are.
Okay, perfect. So I would suggest we resume on this in our call tomorrow. The key areas we would like to still to cover are things like we would like to see if you have configured Security Advisor already, and what is the current reports from the Security Advisor. Are there any red things that you want to discuss with us, and we can help you with. That's one thing. The other thing is so Tim, you mentioned about the at the beginning about redundancy of active. So what we'll do in the next session tomorrow is maybe we'll look at a bit more about each of your services such as Key Vault. If we've got other aspects to see how are they configured for active scenarios at the moment. So just a bit more on that, and then we need to cover the CI/CD elements. And how you've got your monitoring. I think you mentioned App Insights, so we'll kind of cover those areas.
Jeremy, what do we need from other resources tomorrow? Or is all those topic stuff that you can cover as well?
That's pretty much all I can cover. Pretty much all of them. It'll be if they're all at a higher level. So if we have to get into some detail, we might need to pull them in. But
we can also leave a list of open questions, and I can have them.
Yep.
Answered as well, so no biggie.
Perfect.
All right,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking App Insights and the Security Dashboard, I kind of live there.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about that. I'm just worried about, I want to make sure that architecturally, when we talk in terms of the design of the application and services and whatnot, that they at least get that context for what we're doing or not. In that, I would probably bring in an Alex or a Brandon if we need to get to that level. That's all. But, all right, this sounds like a plan. We'll continue tomorrow, and we'll see how far we get.
Sure. And I think Tim and Jeremy, again, like we did for Gen 1, if you can think of top 2 or 3 things, concerning things that you want us to discuss, then it'll be good to do that as well tomorrow.
Yeah, that's where most of a lot of my questions today were related around the Security Dashboard findings I found in the Security Dashboard, where most of my questions come into play. So I'll have quite a bit just by looking at that Security Dashboard tomorrow.
Okay, cool.
And a lot of mine will come down to cost optimization, performance, things of that nature, redundancy, failover. Again, the secondary DNS, which we don't need to re-talk about. Anything like that. Obviously, those are the areas that we can't afford reputation loss due to downtime or similar. So, making sure that we look at the configurations that are applicable, and and then kind of go from there. So tomorrow we'll jump into this some more, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Excellent. Thanks for your time, guys.
Well,
Thank you.
Tomorrow.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. See you tomorrow.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye. बस हो गई यार।
ऐसे लौटते वक्त एक लॉरी उसे उड़ा के